All right, I think we are live. Double check here. I don't know if anybody's joined us yet, so we'll hang on for a couple seconds, but let's see.
It's always the fun thing about live videos. It's like, okay, I don't want people jumping in 5 minutes into it, asking the same questions that we just answered. So let's give it a few seconds to build. Yeah, I always have
There's
that.
that, and then it's on the flip side. It's like you don't want to sit here and talk about nothing for 10 minutes while people start to
If
join
somebody
in.
is, yeah.
People come after to watch, like, this is garbage, and they turn it off.
I realize that on all the I'll do these live reviews of stuff in the Facebook group, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna jump straight into it. So if you came in and you missed a part, you can just go back and watch it. But for the people who did jump on early, I don't want them just waiting around watching me twiddle my thumbs. It's catch-22 though.
All right, looks like we got a few people in here. So, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. I got a special guest with me tonight. I asked him to come on because he, on his blog on bourboner.com, I wanted to talk, I want to start doing a little bit of talks on topical stuff, get away from doing just reviews and things like that. And I wanted to do some topical videos. So I kind of figured when I started this, I think I was doing a review on Henry McKenna. And I got a bottle that wasn't as good as I thought it should be. So that kind of spurred me to want to start with a single barrel conversation. So Blake on his blog did a talk about single barrels, and this is months ago, and this wasn't recent. It was probably in the last 6 months or something. But anyway, so I wanted to invite him on. So if you don't know Blake, he is a regular guest on the Bourbon Pursuit community roundtables. He has a blog on bourboner.com, and he just started a brand new website that we're going to talk about a bit probably towards the tail end of this. Called Sealbox, which is like a he selects a bunch of hand selected spirit products and puts those up on his site. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And he's also a prolific Instagram poster, prolific home barbecuer and things like that. So everybody give a big hi to Blake.
Thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it. Yeah, the best intro I've had by far on anything. I start thinking about it. It's like, well, I guess you gotta get a lot of irons in the fire, but no, it's a lot of fun. When you're dealing with whiskey and spirits and barbecue, it's kind of hard not to enjoy it. So
absolutely, they all kind of go hand in hand. So you might as well do them all, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, let's just get right into it, man. I want to start the conversation. I want to talk about single barrel stuff, and I'm sure most of you who are joining us now know about it. But in case anybody watches this video at some point who doesn't, obviously single barrels are just that. They're a whiskey that is all come from a single barrel. It came from one barrel aged wherever the heck it was aged. So, and we're specifically, I want to talk about single barrel products, not store picks. Again, for those of you who don't know, that store picks are either a company or a group of people go and select their own barrel that they like the flavor and character of and put it in their store, bring it home, distribute it amongst the group or whatnot. So I'm not talking about that so much, although we'll get to a little bit of that at some point. But I really want to talk about like just the regularly available, you could get them in any store type of single barrel. So Blake, you had your article, which is or your blog that was relatively scathing against the whole concept of single barrels. So why don't you give us your opinion, at least the broad overview?
Yeah, so my big thing with single barrels is, well, the first thing is, so single barrel is not a legally binding definition. There's nothing to it. I could do whatever I want and call it single barrel. So you start to hear these stories of people and distilleries popping up who they're doing a single barrel's worth, or they're doing a single barrel profile. It's like, okay, we took an arbitrary word and made it even more arbitrary by putting those kind of labels on it. And then the second thing is, kind of like you, I had some experiences with different single barrels that just weren't that great. In Henry McKenna, I can kind of overlook it a little bit. It's a $27, $30 pick at most stores. Okay, I'm okay with spending $30 if I don't love it. But you get some of these higher end bourbons who, Michter's 10 is single barrel. Four Roses has now cut it back, but they had a single barrel limited edition. You get a lot of these things where you're spending 75, 80, 90 bucks on it. I want it to be good, or I want to know what I'm getting into. And I've seen it with even samples. You'll get a sample of something, and it hadn't happened with Parker's Heritage. Let's see, that would have been 2017. And I got my sample and I said, wow, this is really good bourbon. I'm happy with this year, talked about it, reviewed it, whatever. And then I go out and buy a bottle and I'm like, this isn't the same bourbon. Like, I don't even know that this is better than some of the Elijah Craig store picks I've had. So that's my big riff with single barrels. Not to say I hate all single barrels. Distillers shouldn't do it. It's just kind of more like a buyer beware. You get some people say, yeah, oh, I love single barrel bourbons. It's like, well, that's like saying I love blue cars. Well, you could have an old blue car or a Lamborghini that's blue. That's a very different thing. So, yeah, that's my biggest thing, is just making sure that when people are buying, they kind of understand what they're getting into, and not just buying into some of the marketing cliches and a little bit of the hype that we have in bourbon today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the problem isn't that single barrels are a bad thing, but barrels are kind of marketed as the premium option out of the different whiskeys, and that's really not the case. Like, yeah, you could get a barrel that's the best thing you've ever tasted, but then, again, and Henry McKenna is a good example that I've had some amazing Henry McKenna bottles that I paid $27 for, and it was just mind blowing. And then I've had, like, this one I have right now is probably it's not bad whiskey, it's just not what I'd want it to be. So it's probably, I hate saying it's the worst one I've ever had, but it's the worst one I've ever had. Like, I've never
truth is truth.
Yeah. Truth is the truth. And this is the worst bottle of Henry McKenna I've ever had. And it's drinkable and there's nothing wrong. And I'm not mad that I paid $27 or $30 or whatever I paid for it. But it's always that the single barrel's marketed as the premium option. If there's a line of whiskeys, just take the Four Roses, their basic line, the small batch and the well, it used to be yellow label. I don't know what it is now. Brown label.
Brown mustard.
Mustard label. But out of those three regular line, the single barrel is their premium option. And now, granted, it's a higher proof and things like that as well. But, it's always marketed. Even some stores, I'm sure you've seen this, some stores have a section that is just single barrels. Like, it's the premium thing. Like, oh, here's the regular whiskey and here's the single barrels. And that's kind of the problem with the whole thing, is it's marketed as better whiskey, and that's really not necessarily true, like you were saying. So
yeah, I had a friend of mine who he runs several stores here in Jacksonville. He'll always say, older is not better, more expensive is not better, better is better. Single barrel is not better. It could be whatever it is. Just if you find something that tastes good, that's what you need to go after. But don't try to put all these little, descriptors on it and say, well, that's why I like it. No, you may not like it because it's single barrel. And I get it, for some distilleries, they're trying to give that kind of that, breadth of flavor profiles. You want to taste the different things that the distillery has to offer. I get that. But at the end of the day, for me at least, do that in a $25 to $35 bottle, unless you can just guarantee me that every barrel you selected is prime, which what can distilleries do that with? It can't be a big release. I'm not that interested in a single barrel limited edition.
Nope. And that's the problem is, the premium end of the market that are doing things in single barrels, like you said, with Parker's or the Michter's 10-year. And granted, I've never had a bad pour of Michter's 10-year, but it's still a single barrel product. I mean, there's strong potential you could get one. And obviously there's a lot of great single barrel stuff. And like I'd mentioned, I didn't really want to focus on store picks, but if you find a company that has a great person tasting the whiskey, doing the picks, I mean, those are generally always going to be a great product for you because you're in line with their taste profile. You like how they pick whiskey, and that's great. But the person at the distillery who's picking these barrels isn't that person. That it could be anybody. I don't know how the process works internally with each distillery, but it could be anybody there. And I'm sure it's a small group of people, but maybe their taste is different than yours. So the barrels that they think are, high quality barrels to pick for their single barrel products aren't to your taste. So it's just tough.
Yeah, and that's where I do want to clarify something on my post, because I got a lot of pushback on this. In general, I'm not talking about store picks whenever I said I hate single barrels. store picks are unique for a specific reason. One, you have to trust the person, and two, it usually gives you a chance to find a barrel that's a little bit off profile. So it's not exactly like what's usually out there. You know, you see that a lot with some Four Roses picks, even some of the new Wild Turkey, like the Russell's Reserve picks, and some Buffalo Trace stuff as well. We did a barrel pick back in January, and it was like, okay, we really like these two barrels. This one tastes like a really good Buffalo Trace, and this one tastes like just a unique, really good bourbon. And we went with the unique, really good bourbon just because you can go get a Buffalo Trace off the store shelves if you want to. But we want to try to give, you know, with us, it was with the community roundtable. So it's like we want to try to give those people a chance to try a Buffalo Trace that's like unlike the majority of Buffalo Trace that's out there. So if you trust the person who's tasting it, by all means, buy those single barrels. You know, that I still think that's some of the best deals available or value available in bourbon today. But be careful of who's picking it, you know, because some stores just say, you know, send me whatever you think I'll like, and it comes with a sticker like selected by the master distiller. You know, just the alarms start going off in my head whenever I see that kind of stuff, because I've been on some picks where you taste a few barrels and you're like, that's just not good bourbon. And that's not me saying that, you know, it'll be a few other people in agreement of like, yeah, that's not good bourbon. But somebody's getting those barrels. So there's some store somewhere in the U.S. that is not to say that's terrible and they're ripping their customers off, but I would rather have the on-shelf version of it than a bottle for $5 more with a little sticker that says selected by. So yeah, that's my big thing with private picks as well, is trust the tasters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people they hear a lot of the hype about the single barrel products. A lot of people, and it's true for the people, like you said, that you trust to make the picks, but these stores also, you know, people are catching on to the fact that the single barrel stuff is hyped up now, and they're, you know, distilleries, not everybody has the ability to send someone to Kentucky or wherever the distillery may be to do the pick, you know, so these distilleries are perfectly willing to upcharge their whiskey and send these guys. I mean, I don't know if you've ever done it this way or not, but you know, they'll send 3 samples or 6 samples of different barrels, and you get to pick one through the mail. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the person doing the picks are great. Like there's a local store, and I'm not going to name names, but they've done a lot of picks, but you go in there and talk to them about it, and it's just like, well, we all sat around and tasted it, and this one we kind of liked, so we picked it out of 3 different barrels that they were given. And it's, you know, you weren't given a wide selection. The people picking aren't the best. The guys in that store didn't even really know much about the whiskey. They didn't know how old it was. They didn't know anything. So it was just like, it's really, you got to be careful about the single barrel store picks as well, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, keep going.
Go ahead. No,
man, I was just going to move on a little bit. And so I want to know, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but where's your single barrel pain point? Like, where's the limit where you say, I think you'd said like 25 to 35 is kind of your ballpark. And that's kind of for me too. But like, where's your pain point? Like, where do you say like, I don't want to take the chance anymore. The lottery is no longer fun at, you know, $50 or whatever the price may be.
Yeah. So in this, I kind of have to curb my answer a little bit, because obviously I've got to create content for the Bourboner blog. So that price point gets moved up a little bit. But for me personally, I'm looking at $35-$40 maybe for a lot of this stuff. Now I'll take a flyer on more expensive bottles just because I want to be able to do a review on it and taste it, see what that year's like. You know, getting samples is great, but at the end of the day, I prefer to buy my bottles just because I feel like there's, you know, far less, whatever, manipulation or whatever you want to call it. Just you're not leveraged at all to give a good review if you buy your own bottle. And so I'll spend a little bit more if it's something I really do want to review. But for me personally, just buying to enjoy and drink, yeah, I'm not going much above $40 to $45.
Yeah, I'm with you. I kind of feel like the Four Roses single barrel is kind of like my cap on my. Again, for us, it's a little bit different scenario when we're doing stuff for the purpose of doing a review. I mean, obviously we'll buy different things because that's what you have to do. But Yeah, I mean, my personal pain point for my regular drinking stuff is, I mean, I love Henry McKenna, and I'm perfectly willing to spend $30 and take a chance, as I've never gotten a bad bottle. I've just had, like I said, this one's the least good out of anyone I've ever had. So, actually, before we move on a little bit more from there, I didn't ask you what you're drinking right now.
I probably shouldn't be drinking this, but it's actually rum. So,
What's wrong with that?
Yeah. I visited I mentioned it. I think we're still off air, but visited a rum distillery today. It's Richland Rum. So they do a cask exchange, and it's a port. It's essentially finished port or finished rum in a port cask, but they take the rum cask. But yeah, so I kind of mix it up a little bit. As you can see, I've take this. I kind of set my battle station accordingly on this side of the to make sure that when I do these kind of things and I sit in the same place for interviews or the bourbon round table or whatever it is, that I can just reach over and grab and sip away as I go, which I think I'm going to pull a little bit of Maker's Mark Private Select next. What about you? What are you drinking?
Right now, I'm sipping on that Henry McKenna. I kind of felt it was appropriate to start there, although I'm not going to hate on you for the rum. We could talk about this maybe if we have time a little bit later, but I'll give Fred Minnick a little bit of credit, and I'll give you a little bit too. You've been rather, Fred Minnick kind of started the rum thing of touch with his pursuit, and especially with the Foursquare stuff. And you've kind of, I think, gone down that path a bit too. You post a lot of pictures, and you did in the past with a lot of like Foursquare rums and stuff. So I am not a rum head, but I don't know if this will focus. But I'm trying. I'm getting there.
Those are really good places to start with rum. Well, those are really bad places to start with rum, because then you're going to drink other rums and think, I'd rather just be drinking the 2004 and 2005.
I haven't been much into rum. I've done a few reviews of rums, and those are kind of in my first actual like sipping rums I've ever tried to get into. I did a Dorley's product, which is Foursquare, and I really enjoyed it. My only gripe with it was the proof on it. I hate the fact that, I don't want to get too deep into the rum right now, but I hate the fact that all these rums are 80 proof. Like for the most part, you can't find a rum that's above 80 proof unless it's Foursquare or a couple other places. And some of them, even if you do, it's like you're getting to the 43% range or something.
Yeah, you're still not.
My gripe.
Yeah, they it seems like the higher proof stuff really hit bourbon and whiskey first, and it'll probably slowly trickle down. I did from that same Richland rum, I did a barrel pick from them, and I was able to get it at cask strength, but even their cask strength was 107.5 proof. So it's really good. But if you're used to drinking a really high proof bourbon, it's different. But yeah, no, rum's fun, and I think it's nice to have a change of pace every now and then.
No, I'm totally with you. And I've tried expanding into a couple other things with Scotch and Irish whiskey. And for me, I'm having a tough transition into that stuff. So it'll be a little time. But the rum is an easy transition for a bourbon drinker, I think. I find the flavor profiles to be somewhat similar. They're obviously different, but you're in the kind of the same vein where with Scotch and Irish, you're going in a totally different direction, really.
Yeah,
so I think rum's a good transition.
That peated Isla Scotches, and it's just like a completely different world.
Yeah, I haven't gotten into the peated stuff yet. I'm waiting. I have a couple bottles, so I'm waiting to get one in a blind review and just be like, We'll see how that's gonna go.
It's an acquired taste, and one I can say I've never actually acquired. So,
all right. So we kind of talked about a pain point. So I thought it'd be fun. Before we got on, I looked up on a few different people's lists just randomly about what the best single barrel products were out available on the market. So I thought it'd be kind of fun. I'm just going to throw a couple names I got to think 10 of them here. I'm going to throw some names at you. Give me like five seconds of your thoughts on each one. Just real quick, hit or miss. It's kind of like the Rorschach test of single barrel products there.
All right. So we're thinking like 0 to 100 scale, or just any thoughts I have?
Need numbers. Just the first thing that hits your mind about that particular product, whatever that might be. Cool. This is just for fun. We're not trying to be serious. This is seriousness.
It's
All right,
not being recorded or anything and used
yeah, we're not
against
recording. Nobody's watching. So let's see. Let's start with Blanton's.
It's a great bourbon that has probably it's jumping on that hype train really fast.
Yeah, I think I've heard the description, at least with the straight from the barrel, that it's the fifth BTAC. Four Roses single barrel.
A really good bourbon. Definitely on my list of top 5 bourbons to drink if you're getting into bourbon.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, here's a different one. Jim Beam single barrel.
Not my cup of tea.
I don't know how that made it on anyone's top whatever list, but it was there. All right.
Yeah, there's Knob Creek single barrels can be really good, actually. If we said Blanton's is on the overhyped train, I'm gonna put Knob Creek single barrel on the underrated train.
I'm with you there. Jack Daniel's single barrel.
It's actually bourbon. Jack Daniel's single barrel, I'm actually going to put that on the underrated train because Jack Daniel's regular is pretty bad, but I've had some Jack Daniel's single barrels that aren't that bad, actually. So in a pinch and you're in a bar with nothing but Jack Daniel's and a few others, if you can find the single barrel, it's last ditch effort.
I agree. And I don't know if you've had the single, I'm sure you probably have, but the single barrel proof is actually pretty darn good. I think that one's super underrated. I mean, obviously because it has the Jack Daniel's name on it, but the barrel proof is actually really good.
Yeah, Jack Daniel's is just, they're like the Budweiser of whiskey. And so do you want to drink, what was it, like Budweiser Black Crown or something that came out? Or, yeah. It's kind of like the Budweiser Platinum.
All right, here's one that's definitely on the hype train is Elmer T. Lee.
Absolutely. Elmer T. Lee was the one that got it all kicked off. It was the master distiller at Buffalo Trace, and while it was still, it had been aged at the time, I believe. But yeah, he picked those barrels for the first Blanton's release, which was the first single barrel. So you got to pay the respects, but yeah, that one's unfortunately, ever since he passed away, there's all kinds of rumors of they'll never make it again. Oh, it's this and that, and it's a good $30 bourbon, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's a good $30 bourbon, and that's where I'll leave it.
Yeah.
All right, we touched on this one a little bit earlier, but Michter's 10-year.
Yeah, so Michter's they're a little tricky one for me. So they're kind of the ones who are continuously pushing the price. They're pushing that real limited edition. It seems like them and both Whistle Pig pushing as much, I don't want to call it marketing, but the price limits of bourbon and rye whiskey for Whistle Pig. But I actually like Michter's. All my interactions with them have been great. I haven't gotten a bad 10-year bottle. I threw 2 Michter's 10 years in a blind review, and it came in first and third. So, and that was out of, I think, 10 whiskeys. So yeah, they're pushing the price, but at least it's a consistent single barrel.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm with you totally on the price point. I think they're just trying to push the limits. They're doing it, and like it's same thing like a lot of the stuff that's coming out now, Kentucky Owl or the guys that split off from there with Old Carter. So like they're just pushing the limits of this price points, and there's not anything to back up to justify why these things are that expensive. I mean, it's not like they're old or even like, I mean, look at the Kentucky Owl Rye Batch 2. I mean, they upped the price nearly 50%. They lowered the proof. I mean, there's nothing else different about it. So
yeah, that's the thing is some of those early Michter's 10-year bottles, they had some much older bourbon in it than 10 years. And now it's probably closer. It's probably right around 10 years. And it's like, well, why was that bottle $70 and this bottle is now $180? But supply and demand, I get it. We, as enthusiasts, we like to think of it as everyone's a part of this hobby community, but it's a business for them at the end of the day. So,
well, totally. I mean, there's that. And I mean, I guess as a consumer for me, I guess we're getting off on a tangent, but as a consumer for me, It's always more kind of like, I want to know, I don't mind paying more for a whiskey, but I want to know what it is about that whiskey I'm paying more for. Like if there's a justification for it,
It's the
I'm for it.
wax. It's
Yeah,
always the wax.
The wax is worth at least $20.
Yeah, exactly. If a bottle has
I'll pay
wax
20
on
bucks
it,
for wax.
yeah.
All right, let's move on. We got Elijah Craig, 18-year-old.
Ooh, that's a game of bourbon roulette. That's another one. I may have even talked about it in the post, but I've had some bottles that are up there for me. Incredible whiskey. I've had some bottles in there that I thought I'd rather be drinking $30 Elijah Craig non-age statement. So I'll call that bourbon roulette.
I agree, and I would say for me, the problem that I have with it is the price point now. I think retail on it's like 130, and it wasn't too many years ago. I mean, maybe 3, 4 that it was a $50 bottle of whiskey. Yeah. So like when you are been around long enough that you can remember when a bottle was a third of the price, it creates problems for me in my head.
Yeah, and that's kind of what they were banking on, was the fact that most people wouldn't care, and there's a new wave of bourbon drinkers, and yeah, Heaven Hill's one of the ones that basically, I don't know if they admitted it publicly, but they admitted it through other sources and channels that, yeah, we just watched the secondary market. So when we re-released the Elijah Craig 18 year, we put it at what the secondary market price was. And it's like, hey, I like that because I would have liked to have bought it more of whenever I bought it originally, the same price. But hey, it is what it is.
Yeah, I would love, I mean, this is another, we could have a whole nother video on this topic, but I would love to dig into distribution, and I would love to see that whole system change, because if it could, then we can maybe get back to where whiskey is getting charged for the prices that it should be. The distilleries are making the money they should, because I understand their gripe with it. You know, they're selling it at a reasonable price. And then Buffalo Trace, I think, is pretty good about this, is they still have kept their MSRP and their costed it to the retailers relatively low, and they're just getting eaten up on the backside. Like, why should the retailer or the person flipping it be making all the money and we're making 30% or whatever their profit margins are, you know?
Yeah. And that's where you get into a can of worms a little bit, because distributors is billion-dollar businesses. They're not going to be cut out anytime soon, unfortunately. But and then you have the manufacturer, the distillery, who legally they can't set the price. I think Buffalo Trace has kind of taken the route of, yeah, in the news and media, they like to say, well, we're fighting against the secondary market. We've spent $500,000 trying to stop fakes. Like to see some accounting entries on that, maybe, but where that $500,000 went. But at the end of the day, they're worried about selling 4,000 cases a week of Fireball and Rain vodka than they are to sell the 3 cases per state of Pappy Van Winkle 23. You know, so for them, it's more of kind of a thorn in their side than it is a a real business model or anything that actually drives the business.
Yeah, and I think with Buffalo Trace, I hear more gripes about them specifically with the retailers that I talk to in my area, is that Buffalo Trace, well, it's the distributors, but the distributors of Buffalo Trace, or I don't know where they get their influence from, but they're really pushing all the other Buffalo Trace products hard on these stores. And, you know, you get 1 bottle of Pappy if you buy 20 cases of our wheated vodka, and it's like, and it's garbage. Like, they can't sell this other stuff. So it makes it tough. And it makes it, that's kind of part of the reason all these stores are trying to upcharge so much, and they need to make the money because they invested so much money and broke even or took a loss on selling all this other stuff just to get a bottle of Pappy or a bottle of Stag or whatever the case may be.
And it used to be, you know, if you did a barrel pick or something, you had a pretty good allocation. But now that every store in the country wants as much as they can get, and every bar wants as much as they can get, I wouldn't be surprised if over the next few years we just see more and more going to on-premise accounts, bars and restaurants getting the majority of the allocations, just because that way Buffalo Trace can say, hey, if you want to try it, go to a bar. That's the only way to guarantee that the bottles get opened, which ultimately I think is what most of us would like to see. So, yeah, we'll see.
I mean, I think it kind of already is going that route, at least in my area. I don't know about you there in Florida, but here in Southern California, you cannot find Weller anything. I mean, Weller anything is impossible to find. You may be able to pick up a bottle of Special Reserve somewhere, and you're paying $50+ for it if you want it. And I would never pay that. I mean, I travel quite a bit for work, and I went to Texas not too long ago, and there were shelves as far as the eye can see full of Special Reserve for $15, everywhere. So it wasn't hard to come by. But here, there's like local bars. There's one local bar specifically. There's a big whiskey bar, and they have shelves full of every Weller product. They have Special Reserve, tons of antique, tons of 12-year. And so the question is, how did they get all of that if the stores can't get it? And I think it's kind of like what you said, is that's kind of the model these places are going to, is get it into the bars, because that's where it'll get open. You don't have to play this secondary game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Weller's a tricky one. We actually had an advantage here in Florida where so ABC, which is it's a big retailer here. It's not like a control state ABC. They have the whatever distribute or sole rights to the Weller brand in Florida, so no other retailer can sell it. With that, they got a lot of it. So I mean, literally until about two and a half years ago, Weller 12 was still on the shelf everywhere for $27. And, it was Weller 12. I hate to say it, but was my mixing drink for quite some time because of that, which now it's just seems crazy. But even they've gotten to a point where they're trying to figure something out. They have people stalking the shipment trucks. They have people, harassing their employees, and people go crazy for it. But it just wasn't that way a few years ago. So,
and it's kind of the same as a lot of things. Is Weller is a good $30 bourbon for a 12-year. I mean, it's
absolutely.
not. I don't understand. Like, I mean, I saw it in a store in LA. I don't know, maybe about a month ago for $200. Is what they had it on the shelf for. Weller 12-year. And it's just like, does someone? I mean, obviously, someone's going to come in and buy it if you're putting it on the shelf at that price. So,
yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, I always think it's all about perspective, because you and I go in and see it for $200, and it's like, somebody is insane for who would ever pay that. But then the guy coming behind us who's new to bourbon comes in, and they say, "Oh, you've heard of Pappy Van Winkle, haven't you?
Yeah,
this is the exact same stuff. But look, it's only $200." For them, that sounds like a steal. So, it's all how you frame it.
To the Pappy, I think it was the 20 or 23 year for $2,000 or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So you're probably right on that one.
I'm sure that bottle was gone soon.
All right, so tangent enough. Let's go. We got two more of these whiskeys. We don't need to talk about one of them, because one of them is Henry McKenna. I think we've touched on that one enough. And the last one on my top 10, or at least 10 single barrel products to talk about, is Russell's Reserve single barrel.
So Russell's Reserve, I'm kind of hit and miss on them as well. I'm gonna put them slightly over hit and miss. I'm gonna put them more in like the 60-40 range. Russell's Reserve probably doesn't get all the attention it should, because it is a really good bourbon. And when we talk about some hyped up bourbons, there are a lot of Russell's Reserve single barrel picks that I would take over a Michter's 10-year, some of the other ones in the list, occasionally Blanton's, because it's a little higher proof and that kind of stuff. But then every now and then a Russell's Reserve 10-year pick slips in where I'm just like, I don't like it. So they're one who add it into your repertoire. If you're buying consistently, add it into your repertoire. They're putting some really good bourbon into the bottle, but still not like a guaranteed buy for me.
No, I'm with you. And I will say, I think out of single barrel products and stores pick, I think if you have a good source for store picks, and they're doing a lot of Russell's picks, I love the Russell's picks. I think Russell's picks are some of the most underhyped whiskey out there for me. I love them.
They going back to kind of what I said about the trusting who's doing the pick and everything, and they can get a unique profile that you won't get on the shelf. Russell's is incredible for that. We did one through Bourboner, and we had it was 8 or 10 samples, and it was like it was 4 or 5, but 4 what's called 4 of Russell's Reserves, 4 of what's Kentucky Spirit. And we just said, we're going to try all of these blind and just pick whatever we think is the best bourbon. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, we're going to pick a Kentucky Spirit because, I love Kentucky Spirit. It's a great pick. Ended up being a Russell's Reserve, and it was just so different from everything else. And it was incredible bourbon. So yeah, if you have somebody who's doing a lot of good store picks and they have one, definitely try that out.
Absolutely. All right. So we kind of cleaned up our list there, went over some of these popular single barrel products. So I kind of wanted to ask you, what do you feel, and I'll tell you my opinion, is the most consistent single barrel product? And I mean, for me, I'm going to say, I don't know. I think Four Roses is up there. I think Four Roses in general is super consistent on the flavor profiles and their products that I've had. So I'd say there for consistency, I'd say the Four Roses single barrel's up at the top, the top of my list for sure.
Yeah, Four Roses is up there. Blanton's actually does a pretty good job with consistency. I feel like the Michter's 10 we talked about is pretty consistent. I still kind of wonder how they keep it so consistent, but that's, I don't know if that's because there's no legal definition of single barrel or they just are really good at selecting barrels.
Michter's specifically is a problem too, because Michter's is going through this transition, their 3-phase plan or whatever the heck they call it, where they're transitioning from sourced whiskey into their own whiskey, into blending their own and sourced and whatever the heck there is. I heard them talk about it at one point, but there's this whole tiered plan they have to transition into their own distillate. And how are you keeping your product consistent doing that when you sourced all your whiskey from before? The ages were much different than they are now and likely will be in the future. That's a tough one.
Yeah. But as far as I think probably Four Roses is the one who keeps it as consistent as possible.
Yeah, so. I'm with you. And I don't know if it has anything to do with, I've never been to really many distilleries at all, but I've certainly never been to Kentucky. But my understanding was Four Roses, their rick houses are typically shorter than everybody else's. Like they don't go as tall as everyone else. And perhaps that has something to do with the consistency of their aging process. But
yeah, so they use, what do they call it? Like single level warehouses where most of these guys are 7-9 stories tall. Four Roses, I think they stack them up. It's like 5 barrels high on all of them. So they'll just have more spread out across. And yeah, it keeps it a little more consistent in general. The flavor difference you get between floor 1 and floor 9 at a Jim Beam distillery is huge. Whereas Four Roses, you can get some, but it all comes down to the wood, where in the warehouse it is, not necessarily the height. So that probably does help them out some.
So I think we kind of covered most of the single barrel topic here. We kind of went over a lot of the different aspects of single barrels. I guess one other question we could talk about is, out of easily obtain, we can go back to the store picks a little bit. If you had your choice, let's say you go to your favorite retailer who you've been going to for a long time, and they have a person who selects their barrels who does a great job, and you have the full array of store picks to pick from. Price point, obviously, let's take the price point out of it. If you had a store pick of something that's $200 over $20, I get it what you're picking. But if we could kind of eliminate that, what do you think you're going for? What's your favorite store pick from a reliable stores?
Yeah, so that depends a little bit, but I think Knob Creek store picks are very underrated. I've had some incredible Knob Creek store picks. Next, I'm going to kind of throw a wild card out there. Used to be single barrel, no longer, but Eagle Rare store picks, I think are really good because, you're still in that $30 range, and you're talking about a 10, sometimes 11-year-old barrel for $30, and it's really good. That's a great bourbon for store picks. We could always Let's see who else from people who are consistently doing store picks. Then I have to throw out Four Roses OESK. That's my favorite Four Roses recipe. Picked an incredible Four Roses OESK barrel a few years ago, so that's probably not my next one. And if I ever see that in the store pick, I grab it.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I'm on all those. I mean, the Knob Creek store picks are one of the best values you can get out there because you can get like I have two. I just got two recently, a 13 and a 14-year-old. They were both $49.99. And I mean, that's a fantastic price for a cask strength whiskey and at that age and from a reputable distillery. I was super happy with both. I mean, I haven't opened the 14-year, but the 13-year, actually I have it right here. I brought it out to drink tonight, but yeah, it's a 13-year-old Knob Creek that I paid, $50 for, and I'm super, super happy with. It's great whiskey.
Which that's, just where the really big distilleries have the advantage. They can sell a 14-year-old whiskey for $50. Like, that's pretty insane. You think about all the blenders and different NDPs and everything who are selling, that would be at least at a minimum $100 bottle usually. So
yeah, and I mean it kind of brings us into the craft conversation a little bit, which will kind of bring us to your website. But I think that's kind of part of the weird thing about the system today is that the one up that the big distilleries have and all these new up and coming craft distilleries is they're able to sell things at a much, much cheaper price. Mm-hmm. And these craft distilleries, I mean, I think my gripe with a lot of them, other than the fact that a lot of them put out shit whiskey, but well, not a lot, some, but a lot of them, they're putting out 2-year-old whiskey, 3-year-old whiskey. Not that that's necessarily bad, but in a decent number of cases, it's not a great thing for them. And they're charging, close to what you'd pay, $80 or $100. And it's tough. I mean, it's tough to sit here and spend $100 on a bottle of whiskey when you could buy a Knob Creek bottle for 50, Mm-hmm. So, and I think it kind of makes a weird space in the market. Like I want to support these guys, these local distilleries, the smaller distilleries, like you don't always want to sit here and keep throwing money up to the big corporate chains all the time. I mean, I like supporting the little guy, but it's tough when the price points are sometimes double, and they're not always that. I mean, there's plenty of craft distilleries out there putting reasonably priced products out there. So I'm kind of curious, and you're probably more tuned into this than I am, but what goes into this that makes a craft distillery put out a whiskey at same relatively the same age at $200 and one that puts it out at $40? It's where do you get the difference in pricing? I can't imagine the cost difference is that much. So
yeah, and that's where my rub has kind of come in with the whole craft whiskey thing. Is what I tell people is, it's not that all craft whiskey is bad. It's just that you're usually not buying the right products. So that's kind of the idea behind Sealbox, and not just whiskey, but everything is say there are a lot of good, really good not on a craft level, just on a spirits level, a lot of good craft spirits being produced right now. So the idea behind Sealbox is to have a single place where people can purchase those spirits and say, all right, it's a little more vetted because Blake has been doing these reviews. We kind of, you've read the reviews. If you kind of understand how my palate works, you'll like some of these things that are on the site. But to go back to the pricing, that's the biggest thing is sometimes there is no reason for why it's so expensive other than, hey, we got to make more money. We're going to try to separate ourselves out from the different stuff by being high price point. I get that part of it.
It's like the Maker's Mark move,
Yeah. Okay, you have that. But then overall, it is more expensive to distill on a small scale. So, they don't have the huge continuous column stills, which just, churn out different spirits. Whiskey, for example, a pot still, they're throwing away sometimes 25-30% of what they make of the spirit because they're only taking the hearts and putting it into a barrel and letting it age. Grain's more expensive whenever you're purchasing on that small scale, and a lot of them, they're using a different type of grain. The majority of our bourbon's made from it's number 2 dank corn. It's much more affordable than some of these heritage and heirloom grains. So you got a little more cost there. So all these things kind of add up, but that doesn't mean that a 2-year-old or 6-month-old bourbon should be $80. And that's what I don't like to see. Will there be some of that pops up on seal box? Not as of yet, at least. But it better taste really good. And that kind of goes back to, age isn't the only thing that's a factor here. So for me, if I'm drinking a craft bourbon, it's got to be good. First of all, it has to taste good. It may not taste exactly like Four Roses, but I need to be able to appreciate what they did with it. So if they use different distilling techniques, if they use different grains, if they use different barrels, not necessarily smaller barrels, because that, typically doesn't produce the best product, but, just some different aging techniques. That's really what I'm looking for. But that was kind of more information than the question was asked, but there's a lot that goes into the price. And so what I'm looking for is one that's not just kind of the market segregation of the pricing, but more of, hey, here's why it's more expensive, because we malt our own grains, we do our own distillation and only take a very small section of the distillation, the hearts. And then, we work with the cooperage, we make our own barrels, all this stuff. That adds up in my mind. And if it's a little more and that's the reason, I'm okay with paying it. But if it's just like, well, we need to make some money, so it's in a really cool bottle, and we think you'll pay for it because it's local. No, I don't want that product.
Old Fitz. So yeah, I'm totally with you. Like, give me a reason to pay more. I'm happy to pay more, and I would love to support these small distilleries, but give me a reason. Do something different, do something unique, source local ingredients, get organic stuff, whatever the case may be. Like, just separate yourself in your product and the ingredients that you're using, and I'm happy to pay more. Like, I don't have to pay the same price I pay for Buffalo Trace products or whatever. I can pay more, and I'm willing to, but give me a reason. Don't just, like you said, slap your whiskey in a nice bottle and charge me 3 times the price. Yeah. But that kind of, for those of you that don't know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Blake just started a website, Sealbox, and we'll talk about the name in a minute, because I think it's funny how Blake likes to choose his names for his websites. But he curates, correct me if I'm wrong, you pick all the whiskeys that go on this site. You've tasted them, you've tested them, you've sourced, gotten all the information from the distilleries, and you've chosen specifically what goes on your site. It's all craft whiskey. And I saw someone, I'll let you explain this, but someone said, isn't all bourbon craft? And I mean, depending on your perspective, sure, I think it's kind of the same thing as single barrel. There's no legal definition of craft, but I think you've gone by a certain criteria for your website that you're using to kind of identify what you consider craft, and you're sticking within those boundaries. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's not just bourbon and whiskey, it's everything, because what I've found is, even with the rum, is there's a lot of really good stuff out there that just because I come from a bourbon and whiskey background doesn't mean that there's not other great spirits out there that people may want to try. But yeah, so I try everything on the site. I have the advantage of I can work directly with craft distilleries with my license. So that helps a lot, because otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing with Sealbox. So it starts with that. So we start with a definition of craft, because craft gets thrown out there a lot. Basically, it has to, if it's called a craft distillery, they have to actually be doing the distilling. Sounds like a crazy idea, but it more than not, you'll see a lot of these distilling companies that they don't even own a still. Second, has to be independently owned, so less than 25% of a big corporation, or who are not necessarily outside investors, but you'll see a lot of these people like Constellation or whoever it is, they'll take a minority stake in a company. Yeah. While it is cool, I like a lot of those distilleries, that's not what I'm trying to highlight with Sealbox. Second, it has to be small scale, so less than, or 100 less than or equal to 100 proof gallons a year. That's kind of a technical term with the proof gallons. It's a little bit harder to judge because a lot of this statistics isn't rapidly available. We kind of judge it based off of the size still they have, the amount of states they're available in. That's kind of what we go off for there. And then finally, hands-on production. So I'm really digging into kind of the nitty-gritty of their process. How does the process work? It basically is disqualified if they're just sourcing from MGP and throwing it in a new bottle. That's not to say they're not going to be in the blending side of Seal Box, but if they're under a craft blender, I want to kind of talk with the master blender and see kind of what went into these blends. So there's the art of blending is kind of lost in bourbon and whiskey a little bit, whereas in Scotland, blending is a huge part of it. But it's a really big part of making a good product is the art of blending. So, that's the idea behind the site. So take, for example, we talk about price. So there's this Jimmy Red bourbon that's on the site. I think it's nearly $100 bottle. It's like 95, 98 bucks. But they took a grain, this Jimmy Red corn that was basically extinct, and started regrowing it. And it's a super expensive corn. So they put all this effort into this, getting this corn back up to where they can actually distill. They distill it. It's 100% from that grain. Then they barrel it. It's a little over 2 years old. Most people don't want to pay $100 for 2-year-old bourbon, but this grain is so unique and kind of the story is so unique. I'm happy to pay that to Highwire to say, yeah, I want to try this bourbon. I want to see what Jimmy Red bourbon tastes like because it is so much different and it actually tastes really good. So that's one where I'm like, if you have a chance, and $100 is a lot of money to spend on a bourbon. So if you're just getting into it, try some other $30 bottles first. But if you want to try what this grain, how it makes a difference in a bourbon, this is a great one to try as well. But then, we also have some things from the guys at Finger Lakes Distilling with their McKinsey bourbons. They're like $40. Kings County Distillery, they do smaller bottles, but they're kind of in that same price range. So kind of have a different price selection. I don't want it to be all just super expensive bourbons, but just kind of give an array of different products on the site. So.
No, I think it's super cool what you're doing. That's why I wanted to have you come on and talk about it a little bit too, because nobody's doing that. I mean, it seems like a pretty cool idea and pretty unique. So how does this work? Are you a one-man show? Is this all the Blake show? How does that all work for you?
Yeah. So the majority of the online and everything is me. And then I have 2 employees who they do kind of the back end shipping, package fulfillment, that kind of stuff. So let's see, it's been live for a little over a month now. So that's been going good. But, still a small operation, as small as you can get basically at this point. So if you have a question about your tracking or package, you're probably going to be talking to me at the end of the day. So, no, and that's where I really think there is kind of a gap in the market of people who want to try some of these craft whiskeys, or you visit the distillery, or, whatever it is, a family member visits, and then a lot of them are only available in 1 to 2 states. So you're kind of stuck. You can't get it. So, the idea is to open up the market to some of these great craft distilleries who are making really good stuff, so they can share their products with people across the country. Shipping's always an issue. That's kind of always changing, but no, it's been going good so far.
That's cool, man. So is the goal to, or did you already quit your day job, or is this a side project?
Yeah, it's still a side project. So I have an accounting firm, so I don't know if I'll ever stop accounting, because as nerdy as it sounds, I still love accounting and Excel spreadsheets. So yeah.
Jeez, that's two disparate career paths there, whiskey and accounting.
Yeah, it's if you do public accounting long enough, you'll need to drink. So I say it's kind of I got into spirits the old-fashioned way, which was through tax seasons and public accounting. So
So let's talk about the names, man. So I think I heard you made this crack at some point somewhere. Maybe it was on one of the Bourbon Pursuit podcast roundtables or something. But you got Bourboner, which is neither of them are hard to say, but they're wondering like, am I saying this right?
Yeah. I'm terrible at selecting names is basically what it comes down to. Yeah. So Bourboner, I don't even know where I saw it first, but I was going through all these different names. And so the original thing was to try to create this app. I don't know if you're familiar with Untapped for beer, but to try to do the same thing for bourbon and whiskey. And I'm like, oh, I could call it the mash bill. No, that URL is not available. I could call it this, that. Basically, I was like, oh, Bourboner sounds pretty cool. And Bourboner was taken. And it looks like Bourboner. And so I'm like, I'm not naming this Bourboner. So I was like, oh, I'll go with Bourboner. But now it's people will like capitalize the R and it's Bourbon R. And I'm like, call it whatever you want at this point. I really didn't do a great job with Bourboner. But then, 5.5 years ago, I wasn't really thinking I'd still be talking about it to this day. So it's kind of one of those things you just choose and you go with it. But it worked out. So it stuck. And sometimes, the fact that people have to stop and think, how do you say that? It may help me because then they're thinking about it a little more and it's not just like they forget about it automatically. So
okay, I get you.
That kind of worked out. But then the seal box thing, I really, if I was thinking I should have done it like Craft Direct or something like that. But just to give a little backstory on the story of Sealbox is, so there's a Sealbox cocktail where this bar manager at the Sealbox Hilton in Louisville, if you've ever been there, he found this pre-prohibition cocktail menu and it had the Sealbox cocktail on it. So he recreated the cocktail, put it back on the menu. It was a big hit, If you're in bourbon, everyone loves nostalgia and loves a historical prohibition story. So it was a big hit and, kind of became their cornerstone cocktail and everything. And then a couple of years ago, he came out and said, oh, by the way, I made that whole story up. It was just a cocktail that I created and I named it the Sealbox cocktail. So, that's kind of my idea behind the site is there is a ton of people saying, this is a craft distilled whiskey or rum or vodka, whatever. Vodka is actually even worse than bourbon. But not a lot of people are doing the actual craft distilling and the actual work and making good products. So that's kind of the idea is there's a lot of stories out there. We try to cut through it and give you actually what's going on and tell, the details of it. There's people making craft vodka who actually do go from grain to mash to distill and everything. But then there's a lot of other people just sourcing their craft vodka from a TerraPure and they're basically just putting it into a bottle. So.
All right, cool, man. Well, I'm glad we got to talk about that a little bit because I think it's really cool what you're doing. So we're coming up on we just hit an hour. So before we get out of here, I wanted to try something real quick I thought would be fun. And I don't even know if it's going to work. So we're going to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, fine. I ripped through your Instagram right before we got on here and picked out a few. Let me see if this even works. I picked out a few posts I thought it'd be fun to take a look at and maybe you could talk a little bit about.
It's kind of, do you ever watch the show Hot Ones?
That's kind of where I got the idea.
Okay, I like it. Yeah, what's he call it? Behind the gram or store back? Yeah. You kind of have a Sean Evans look too, so this works.
Yeah, so let me see here. I don't know. Can you see my screen?
Yep, I got it.
All right. So here we go. I don't know if everybody else can see my screen. If you can, I apologize. So here's the one we'll start with. I think you posted this one yesterday. Looks like a fine charred piece of meat there that probably smoked for many hours. Looks like 24 hours with a nice, expensive bottle of whiskey sitting in front of it. So how was that brisket, Blake?
The brisket actually turned out great. So it wasn't 24 hours of smoke, and I had to clarify this on Twitter too. So brisket is a long process. So I start the day before, and I use a dry rub. Essentially just 2/5 salt, 2/5 sugar, 2/5 black pepper, or 1/5 black pepper. I had an extra fifth in there, but put that into or on the dry rub, wrap it up, put in the fridge for at least 4 to 6 hours, and then got up around 3:30 a.m. Had that brisket on the smoker by 4 a.m. and it smoked till about 9-ish, 9:30, and then put it back on the smoker till it hits an internal temperature of 203. At that point, I pull it off and let it rest for at least 3 to 4 hours. So it's a really, really long process to get brisket done correctly. It was about 24 hours all in all, but It turns out incredible. That's one of those things I could just eat constantly. So I ended up cooking, I think it was about 60 pounds. So it was actually my mom's church was doing a dinner, and somehow I got recruited to do brisket, but it was a lot of fun. I did partake with my brisket and rye whiskey before I went, I didn't take that to the church function or anything, but no, it was a lot of fun. And there's just something about smoking that it is relaxing. You're focused on controlling a fire. You're focused on, a lot of different variables because meat's different each time. But at the end, you have this great thing that you can reward yourself with, like a 15-pound piece of brisket.
I love a good brisket. I was wondering how you cooked it for 24 hours, but you obviously didn't, because I've overcooked the brisket before, and it was the bane of my existence. It pissed me off like no other.
Yeah, that's the trick with brisket is you want to get enough smoke on it, and you can see the smoke ring and everything. 4 to 5 hours is about all you need. And then just wrap it in tinfoil and let it get to that specific internal temperature. Then after that, just let it sit. Otherwise, you could end up with pulled brisket. You could end up with chewy brisket. But that's been my go-to for a while now.
How was the whiskey? You had the Booker's Rye.
The Booker's Rye is always good. that one has a special place in my heart. Booker's Rye does. I really like that one. So
I don't know that I ever want to try it, because if I do, I might end up trying to find a bottle and I don't want to. All right, let's try another one here. Sharing. That's not what I want to share. How does this thing even work? Share. They need to make this easier. Here we go. All right, going back to our next. So this is what I was going to talk to you about, the rum, which we already kind of touched on a little bit, but you posted quite a few pictures of different, there's a lot of Foursquare rums and stuff. So we already kind of touched on that, so we'll skip on to the next one. But I do agree with you on all the Foursquare products. I haven't had one that I thought was bad, and they're all really, really fantastic rums.
Yeah.
The next one. Okay, here we go. So I find that you're probably a huge Jaguars fan. And I don't know who this individual is. I don't know if it's your brother or a friend.
Yeah, it's my brother. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys are both, I'm assuming you guys grew up in Florida, so that kind of spurred your fandom of the Jaguars.
Yeah. So we grew up, so my brother is 3 years older than me. We grew up, in bunk beds in a Jaguar room with a Jaguar comforter, Jaguar pillows, Jaguar wallpaper, all that kind of stuff. And, as a Jaguar fan, we've lived through a lot of years of, we'll call it not so great football. And that creates a lot of people to become a little pessimistic, a little cynical about the Jaguars. And even last season, I was cynical about Jaguars. And then, I think in the preseason of 2017, we beat the Patriots. And I think I posted on Instagram, like, this is our Super Bowl for the Jaguars this year. And who would have known that, we'd be playing the Patriots in the AFC Championship game that same season. So it was a lot of fun. So that was, we just happened to be at my mom's house that night. And It was before the AFC Championship. And so we pulled out some old Jaguar gear that was my mom doesn't throw anything away. So it was still sitting in the closet somewhere. We probably wore that same outfit to like 5th grade or something. And but yeah, had to bring it out.
All right. Well, here, let's do this. We got 3 Jaguars preseason games coming up, and obviously the preseason is a shoddy time to be making picks. But let's hear your picks, and I don't know if you can be unbiased in this, but Jaguars versus the Falcons this coming Saturday.
Yeah, let's see. So this will be game 3 of the preseason. So not a lot of starters. So I'm guessing Blake Bortles gets maybe the first series, and then we're going to see Kessler come in. Matt Ryan may not even play at all. I'm going Jaguars 24-10.
All right. The following week, we got you guys versus the Bucks. What do you got?
Oh yeah, no, that's if the Jaguars lose to the Bucks. I mean, I hope there's not a lot of Tampa Bay fans here watching, but no. So is that at Tampa? No.
I don't remember. I didn't look.
I should know, but so my office is downtown, so I get kicked out of the parking lot anytime there's any kind of a sporting event downtown. So I should know, but Tampa Bay. No, I'm going Jaguars 17-3.
There you go. And last, we got you versus the Giants.
Actually, is that the first? No.
I think that's the last preseason game, isn't it?
I was thinking that may be the.
Or is that the first week of the actual? No, I thought that was still preseason.
It could be. That may be no. The home opener is. No, that is the first game. So that's the first game of the year. Yeah, because they open Giants Patriots.
Okay.
So first game of the year. Jaguars are coming out strong. The defense is still going to be the best defense in the NFL. So I'm going Jaguars 14. Yeah, Peyton Manning. Eli Manning still doesn't have it. So Jaguars 14, Giants 3.
Copy that. All right, we got Blake's picks recorded online, so we'll see how he pans out the next couple of weeks here.
I'm gonna get all this hate mail from Giants bourbon drinkers now that made these
hate mail's coming, my friend. Yeah. All right, let's see.
I've gotten hate mail for less. So.
Oh, and on a side note, has anybody ever told you your brother looks like what's his name? Michael Rooker or whatever. I don't know if he looks like this normally, but in this picture, looks like him. Just saying. Just saying.
Michael Rooker.
He's the guy. Can you see my screen? Just saying. Anyways, let's move on.
Okay, I'm definitely posting that to his Facebook page tonight. So,
all right, last one. This was your very first post on Instagram in 2013. We got some what looks like coffee beans inside of a bourbon barrel. Let's talk about it. Or a bottle.
So, a lot of these hobbies all kind of run together. So bourbon, barbecue, coffee, a lot of other stuff. So I think I actually had a bag that this was before the local, what do you call them? Coffee roasters gave you like good bags of their beans that they roasted in. And this was just like one of the brown paper bags and it busted. So I put it in the Four Roses bottle. And worked out pretty well, actually. It seals it pretty tight, keeps the beans fresh. So I stand by that. You even can get a little bit of that bourbon soaking into the beans, so you get a little more aroma from that. So if you need a good place to store your coffee beans, bourbon bottle is not the worst place you could try.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, this has been fun. Let's get everybody out of here. I don't want to keep you all here too long. Blake, thank you so much for coming on, man. This is fun. Maybe we can do it again in the future. Everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. If you want to close out anything to say, Blake, go for it, man.
No, John, just thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. So love to hear people testing out more blind reviews, doing reviews online. So this has been a lot of fun. So I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cool, man. All right, everybody, have a good night. Blake, hang on for 1 sec. Night.